Hello, welcome to my garden. Uh, Today we'll be continuing the subject of love, and this time we're going to look at the subject of husbands, love your wives. Husbands, love your wives. Now, I dare say I've already lost about 50% of any audience because 50% are female and so unlikely to be interested. Well, not everybody is a husband, I understand that, but that doesn't mean that we can't all learn from the principles that we're going to talk about. So, we're going to look at three things. We're going to look, first of all, at the role of a husband in the marriage. We're then going to look at the way that a husband should treat his wife, and that's going to be our biggest subject. And then we're going to look at an example of a good husband. So, first of all, the role of the husband in the marriage. If we were to look at 1 Corinthians chapter 11 and verse 3, or Ephesians chapter 5 and verse 23, we would see that the husband is the head of the wife. He is to be the leader of the house. That doesn't mean he's to be the bully of the house. That doesn't mean he's to be the authoritarian dictator of the house, but rather he's to lead. He's to be the one who is the guiding role in that household. Gentlemen, can I say that if you're not leading in your house, then you're failing in your Christian responsibilities. It's very easy for us to allow our wives to take command and make decisions that they may be right, but they're not that's not the role that God has given to them. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't listen to our wives when they say things, but ultimately we have to be the ones who take on that responsibility. We have to be the ones that are pushing for godliness in our homes. So, first of all, we have to be the head of the wife. Secondly, we are to provide for our families, particularly our wives. In 1 Timothy chapter 5 and verse 8, it says, "But if anyone does not provide for his relatives, and especially for members of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever." That's pretty strong language there. He's worse than an unbeliever. Now, I do understand that there are times when a husband can't provide for his wife. That's a different thing. That's not he doesn't want to provide. That's he's refusing to provide. He's refusing to take on that responsibility as the provider. It is his responsibility to ensure that there are sufficient finances and material things for the household. In the same way that it is the wife's responsibility to ensure that the home is a healthy and happy environment. That doesn't mean that it's only a woman does the cleaning and it's only a man that does the earning. If you look in Proverbs, you'll see the virtuous wife, and she has her own business. So that let's not take this too far and say, well, the husband is the only one that should ever earn money. That's not biblical. It is that he is to be responsible for ensuring that there is enough money, and if that means that he is the one doing it, so be it. If that's the wife that's earning the big bucks, equally well. So those are the roles of a husband in a marriage, but that's not really our subject. That is simply a background to what our subject is. And so the next thing we're going to look at is the way a husband should treat his wife. We could look at Colossians chapter 3 and verse 19, where it says, "Husbands, love your wives and do not be harsh with them," or do not be bitter. So here there's something we've not to do. We've not to be harsh. We've not to be bitter. There's to be a gentleness about us with our wives. Our wives are not servants to command, but rather people we're supposed to love and care for. Ephesians chapter 5 and verse 29 says, "In the same way husbands should love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself, for no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it." And so we've to nourish and we've to cherish. The word nourish means to provide with food or other substances necessary for growth, health, and good condition. So we've to look out for not just their physical needs, our wives, but we've also to look out for their good condition and their growth. And we could think of spiritual growth in this. Are we as husbands interested in our wives' spiritual conditions? Are we doing what we need to do to encourage growth in spiritual things? If not, as Christians, we're failing. But it also says not just to nourish, but to cherish. And that is to protect and care for someone lovingly. Are we protecting our spouses? Are we really protecting them from the dangers and the hurts of the world around about them? And are we doing it lovingly? But notice that both these words, if you were to look them up in the dictionary, nourish and cherish, are verbs. Okay, and I'll come back to that a little bit later on. You know, I've said it before, but the meaning of words are very important. It's important that when we're communicating, we understand the words that we're using and what they really mean. The English language has some things that it's very good for and other things that it's not so good for. And love is something that the English language is failing at desperately. I'm not convinced that's because the English speaking world is less loving than other languages, but there is an issue here. In the Bible, we find 4 different words for love. There is storge, an empathy bond. There is philia, which is a friend bond. There is eros, which is romantic love. And then there's agape, which is unconditional or godlike love. And so if I was to ask you, when the Bible talks about loving your wife, which of these words is most likely to be used, I'm sure many of us would say, oh, well, eros, of course, the romantic love. We have to romantically love our wives. And yes, we should have a romantic love for our wives, but actually that's not the word that is used. It is agape that is used. It is that unconditional love, that godlike love that we are to have for our wives. Many people, when they talk about love, talk about it as if it's a feeling. I fell in love. I feel love for this person. It's an emotional thing. But actually, when we look at the Bible, love is rarely talked about as a feeling, as an emotion, but rather as a verb. It's talked about as an action. 2 John chapter 6 says, "And this is love, that we walk according to his commandments. This is the commandment, just as you have heard from the beginning, so that you should also walk in it." It's an action. It's walking. It's something that we choose to do. If I was to say to you, walk from here to there, the emotions of that don't really come into it. Whether you want to or whether you don't want to, if I have authority over you and I say go, you go. So it is with God. He has commanded us husbands to love our wives as a verb. Not have good feelings towards your wife, but act as though you have good feelings towards your wife. If we were to look at 1 Corinthians chapter 7 and verse 32, it says, "I want you to be free from anxieties. The unmarried man is anxious about the things of the Lord, how to please the Lord. But the married man is anxious about the worldly things, how to please his wife. In this passage, Paul talks about how it's easier for a single Christian to serve God than it is for a married one. And that is because there are competing requirements upon you if you're married. Notice the importance of the wife in this, in the husband's life. It is elevated to an equal height with service for God. God doesn't say, well, if you're married, you can just ignore your wife in order to serve God. No, that's not what it says. It's you can't serve God in the same way because you must love your wife. You must look out as to how to please that wife. So yes, service for God is very important, but so is caring for your wife, so is loving your wife. It is service. Luke chapter 14 and verse 26 says, "If anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, even his own life, he cannot be my disciple." So how do we fit this verse in with what we've just talked about? How it is perfectly acceptable for a husband to love his wife and look out for how to please her. Well, I would suggest that this is about the source of the love. When Jesus is talking here, he's not actually telling people to hate others. This is not a commandment to actually hate these people, but to seek a different source for their love. You love them not because there's something natural that makes you love them, but because God loves them and has commanded you to love them. That is why you love them. This totally alters our understanding of love. Gone are the squishy feelings of eros. I love them because they're beautiful, or because they make me laugh, or because their smile is so astounding. No. We are to love them even when there's nothing lovely in them. Even when our natural being would be to hate them. Still, God has commanded us to love them. And we cannot say we love God and then break his commandments. You see how very profound this verse is? We love not because there's something lovely. We love because it's the right thing to do. Ephesians chapter 5 and verse 25 to 33 says, "Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, that he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of the water with the word, so that he might present the church to himself in splendor, without spot or wrinkle or any such thing, that she might be holy and without blemish. In the same way, husbands should love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself, for no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as Christ does the church, because we are members of his body. Therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This mystery is profound, and I'm saying that it refers to Christ and to the church. However, let each one of you love his wife as himself." Notice that this is not love for the sake of love, but rather it's a love that has a purpose. It is a love that is to seek improvement. It is a love that is to speak to a profound mystery of Christ and the church. When the world looks at us, they should see a little bit of that relationship that Christ has with us, the church, when they look at the way that we have our relationships with our wives. And we should seek for the wife's improvement, for their strengthening, for their nourishment. God is trying to make the church more like himself. As husbands, we are expected to becoming more like Christ and drawing our wives with us as we become more like Christ. Far too often it is the other way around in our world today, where it is the wife that is more like Christ and dragging the husband kicking and screaming behind him. And so next we shall look at an example of a good husband. And I dare say you're all thinking, well, Jesus, he's the perfect example of a good husband. And absolutely you're right. But he's not actually the person I want to pull out. I actually want to talk to you about Hosea. If you were to go and read his life story, you would find that God told him to marry a harlot, to marry a prostitute. And he loves her. He's told to love her. And she cheats on him. And he loves her. And she leaves him. And he loves her, and she has children with other men. And he loves her. She becomes a slave. He buys her back, brings her back into his home, and he loves her. No matter how great her failings, still he loves her. And this is, of course, a picture of Christ. A picture of how God loves his people. But surely we can learn from this. We are told to love our wives. Finally, I want to look very, very briefly at 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 7. For it says there, likewise, husbands, live with your wives in an understanding way, showing honour to the woman as the weaker vessel, since they are heirs with you of the grace of life, so that your prayers may not be hindered. Here we look at the result of failing in our task to love our wives. What is it? Our prayers are hindered. So my friends, be careful how you love, the source of your love, the object of your love. But most of all, be aware of what happens when you fail in your love. There's one more video in this series where we shall look at love the Lord your God, so look out for that. Remember to like and subscribe if you haven't done so already.